This episode will explore the Mexican Mafia's combative relationship with the BGF. Mexicans and blacks are two hyphenated, so-called minorities that have inhabited this country for hundreds of years. Because many associate the U.S. with white racism, some Americans of Mexican and African descent believe that connecting with their ancestors is preferable to identifying with their country of birth. Newsflash: no ethnic group has a patent or monopoly on being American. Mexicans and blacks have fought with honor in our world wars and represent the red, white, and blue just like any other group. This means hyphenated Mexicans and Africans have just as much right to this country as hyphenated Irish, English, Arab, or any other American group. Historical competition between Mexicans and blacks, especially in LA, has many complicated components, not necessarily derived from racial hatred, but stemming from other factors. Most bad boys launch their criminal journeys by engaging in non-violent crimes and touch down at juvenile hall. I officially started doing time in 1964 at Juvie, the abbreviated nickname for juvenile hall. My introduction to the world of ethnic divisions began at the age of 14. The process of being state-raised and bouncing from one facility to another was like a roller coaster ride. In youth facilities, we were referred to as wards. Later, in adult prisons, we graduated and became convicts. At Juvie, the first highlighted order of indoctrination, becoming familiar with the inmate code of conduct established by the inmates themselves, was to stick with your own ethnic group, your own race. You were required to belong to one of the three predominant ethnic groups: Mexican, black, or white. There were rules governing our conduct, such as stick with your own race, respond to any insult with violence, defend and support your fellow member of the ethnic clique, and many more. This youth indoctrination from the very beginning would set the tone for those of us who would become career criminals. This polarization led to power struggles and confrontations based on race. For many of us, it became like a kid's game and a challenge. Like many young men following the road to self-destruction, I was raised by the state of California, and the goal was state prison, our version of graduating to college. The hospitality of the California Department of Corrections was my next stop. Racial confrontations in prison can usually be recognized by certain symptoms. Silence on a prison yard, a proverbial red flag, can often communicate volumes. Immediately prior to the eruption of a race riot, there is an unmistakable hush that can be felt on an otherwise busy and noisy prison yard with over 1,000 inmates, the tension hovering like dark clouds before the storm. Under normal circumstances, it is not uncommon to see black, white, and Hispanic inmates grouped in their ethnic clusters, and when the prison yard is functioning in routine mode, prisoners of all ethnic groups can also be seen interacting with one another and conducting their business. Drug deals are being finalized, organized betting on sports events is a favorite gambling attraction, and many other legal and illegal activities that make the monotonous life in prison more palatable and profitable are undertaken. But when hell is about to break loose, when it hits the fan, as they say, you will observe the following. Serious faces. Somber faces are the number one sign to inmates and prison COs. Only the specially trained high-level convicts can conceal their intentions. Most inmates cannot betray their feelings and wear their emotions on their prison sleeves. There is a marked lack of banter and horseplay that tells the observer there is something much more important going on. Lack of animated conversation. If you study the yard carefully, you will find the ringleader doing all the talking. When an incident is imminent, the soldiers are at attention, so to speak, and the shot callers are giving the orders. As a general rule, the leaders are usually the warriors who will be on the front lines. Excessive clothing, especially on a warm day. The scene in American Me where Olmos confronts Doc and removes his shirt is laughable. If it's a planned confrontation, look for excessive clothing worn by many of the soon-to-be combatants for concealing weapons such as shanks, pipes, etc. Some convicts even place magazines or other insulation to deflect incoming shanks. Although heavy clothing is not necessary for hiding weapons, they are often a tip-off, an indicator of who the holders or packers are. Winter and cold weather is ideal for transporting or packing prison knives because such clothing is not looked upon as out of the ordinary. In the summer, gang officers will conduct a search of any inmate wearing winter clothing on general principle alone. Meeting of the minds. So this is where the leaders of each ethnic group will sometimes get together for a final discussion regarding the issue that brings these groups to the brink of an armed confrontation. Sometimes it is pure posturing, but oftentimes it is a genuine attempt to stave off a full-scale war. When a yard scene progresses to this point, alert correctional officers usually have already summoned extra manpower and have gunmen strategically positioned. The following incident occurred on the San Quentin Upper Yard. A drug deal gone bad precipitated the stabbing of a black inmate in the East Block by MS Danny Dangerous Dan de Avila. Shortly thereafter, a second black inmate was stabbed by Black Dan and Sailor Boy, also in the East Block. The prison grapevine swiftly circulated the news. Led by a member of the Black Guerrilla family, this was the dock scene in American Me, by the way. Black inmates threatened to retaliate for this flagrant act of disrespect. A member of the Mexican Mafia prison gang became the spokesman for the M. Hundreds of inmates formed on the yard as the two prison gang leaders met beneath the yard shed. M representative Marcelo GABBY Baeza from Florencia 13, we nicknamed him Pistolero, Spanish for gunfighter, suggested they avoid full-scale racial bloodshed by having an equal representation of blacks meet them inside the prison gym to settle their disagreement. The BGF representative was Alonzo Bell, who vociferously protested and vowed someone would pay for the stabbing of two of their brothers. In prison, a seasoned convict completely understands there is a time to talk and a time to act. Typically in these situations, when you take out the leader, who in this case happened to be the most vocal participant, the job was almost complete, as the remainder of the group becomes demoralized. Other MM members were positioned in smaller groups of 2 or 3 knife-wielding inmates, and other MS supporters were instructed to be prepared to create a distraction for the main event by engaging the black inmates outside the main perimeter. When it became apparent Alonzo was continuing his vocal performance, GABBY produced a shank from beneath his prison coat and proceeded to fatally stab Alonzo several times as the yard exploded into chaos. After several warnings, Lieutenant Foncannon gave the signal and a prison gunner fired at GABBY, hitting him in the leg and disabling him with one .30-30 carbine round. While on the ground, GABBY was handcuffed by the lieutenant, with Alonzo Bell's dead body only a few feet away on the upper yard asphalt. Gabby waved off and refused to be carried out on the prison hospital gurney, so Lieutenant Von Cannon assisted him. He awkwardly progressed, hopping on one leg, and the COs watched in disbelief at the scene that followed. A gauntlet of Mexican convicts had somehow formed, and they were applauding as Gabby hopped toward the South Block Rotunda to the prison hospital. Somehow, Gabby was grinning as he acknowledged them. A yard about to explode transforms almost by magic into polarized groups of blacks on one side, Mexican and whites on another, with miscellaneous groups looking like lost sheep. In this event, Lieutenant Von Cannon's quick decision, not a very difficult one I might add, probably averted large-scale carnage. The significance of the gunshot to disable Gabby Baeza, plus the sight of the mortally wounded victim, brought the confrontation to an immediate halt. In a similar incident which occurred on the San Quentin yard, officers observed parallel signs of an impending confrontation, but not enough to warrant a prison lockdown. As they monitored the exercise period, one group of 50 inmates huddled and appeared to be conducting a meeting. One officer related, "I was looking at all the inmates crossing themselves with their hands as if they were asking the gods to protect them." Seconds later, an inmate shouted, "Listo," which means ready. "Let's do this." I knew instantly it was going to jump off. In this instance, officers had very little time to react. Their tip-off that an attack was underway was the sight of these men crossing themselves, and this was immediately followed by their shouted order to rush their adversaries. Whenever a pre-planned prison disturbance is in the offing, it is incumbent on an inmate to discourage his family from visiting him if the anticipated event is imminent. No inmate would want their loved ones to drive hundreds of miles only to be turned away at the gate due to a prison lockdown. PNG submitted the following question: "Can you clarify for me about the BGF and MA relationship? In one of your videos, you mentioned BGF member Big Rob knocking out an MA member. The following week after this incident, BGF and MA were playing a basketball game in which MA attacked Big Rob. Why would BGF and MA even be playing ball together, seeing how they were at war? Big Rob and the BGF weren't smart enough to think MA was going to try and hit them?" Great question. You just viewed the account of the confrontation on the San Quentin Upper Yard on August 30th, 1973, where Gabby killed Alonzo Bell. Following that incident, many skirmishes took place in the lockup units and adjustment center yards between the MA and members of the Black Guerrilla family. Big Rob Williams, a BGF member, had recently crossed paths in the inmate visiting room with MA member Sleepy Betancourt. As Big Rob was being unshackled for his visit, Sleepy had already concluded his and was being escorted past Rob with full body restraints and handcuffs. Big Rob unloaded a powerful Sunday punch, knocking Sleepy temporarily unconscious. A few days later, still housed on the first-tier chapel side, Big Rob engaged MS Sonny B. Ballesteros in a fistfight on the AC yard. Although Sonny B., standing 5'9" and about 170 pounds, was a proficient boxer, he couldn't bring the big guy down, and the gunrail officer ended the fight with a few rounds from his .30-30 Winchester. On October 4th, 1973, about 15 inmates were released to the adjustment center yard. Big Rob and some of his comrades were invited to engage in some hoops. Now, I'm not the one questioning the instincts of Big Rob and his friends, because you would think they would know better. Maybe they were thinking of getting off on us at some point. All I can say is we waited for Rob to step up to the free throw line, and I was the first to pounce, stabbing him repeatedly in the chest. Sailor followed suit, and diversionary fights broke out around us. Big Rob's white t-shirt was covered with his blood as gunshots were booming. So I'm thinking maybe Big Rob thought he was going to die because he gave a detailed statement at the hospital identifying 2 Mexican assailants, but retracted when he found out he was not going to die. The abbreviated report you are viewing reflects Big Rob stating he saw 2 weapons which were not found. That's because Sailor and I flushed them down the yard toilet, the commode. PNG also requests, in a couple of other videos you mentioned BGF members being killed at San Quentin by M and AB members. After these attacks, did the BGF seek retaliation? After the murders of 2 BGF members on the San Quentin Lower Yard and South Dining Hall, the prison was on high alert. About a week after the December 19th incident, 5 days before Christmas, prison staff in the adjustment center allowed approximately a dozen adversaries, BGF members and other black associates, out to the exercise yard. The last 3 inmates to be released to the yard were M members Sailor Boy Gonzalez and Spider Arriaga and M associate Mo from Redwood City. Some of the BGF guys were squatting on the yard asphalt and producing their keister stash prison shanks from their rectums. The rest were ready to attack as Sailor Boy and Spider emerged from the adjustment center building, with Mo tying his shoelaces right behind them. Unarmed and outnumbered, Sailor and Spider wasted no time. They initiated the attack. When the fights were broken up by the gunmen, Sailor had a punctured lung and Spider had a few non-fatal stab wounds. Shortly after the attacks on Sailor Boy and Spider, M member Memo Garcia from Pacoima was returning from a visit in North Seg and walking to his cell handcuffed from the front. Memo was caught on the tier by 3 BGF members and stabbed multiple times. Once again, they had Memo dead to right. If they had killed him, I'd be reporting to you that Memo had died. But he did not. So did the BGF know how to kill people? I'm sure they did. Did they kill Memo? No, they didn't. Should they have? You would think so, right? 3 armed assailants, a handcuffed target, and open for the finishing touches. This was not the case of what the M did, as it was what the BGF didn't do. If this were a movie script, I'd write more Mexican Mafia victims into the scene to equal things out. But then I'd be lying to you. PNG completes his multiple tiered question. You mentioned several times that no M member except Cheyenne was ever killed by an enemy, and same for the AB. So you mean to say that all this stuff you mentioned in this video about the BGF taking on the prison guards and killing them, but they weren't capable of killing an M member or an AB? I'm sure you can understand how this may confuse one. I almost feel like I'm supposed to apologize for the facts I relate. I can't speak for the AB, but I am a Mexican Mafia expert. As a participant observer, the sociological term for someone who has been there and done that, I can speak about, and I am fully aware of every Mexican Mafia validated member who has come down the pike from 1957 through my official defection in 1978, and I remain very informed on the few who were made up to 1982. Rene Boxer Enriquez entered the prison gang scene sometime right after I departed. He debriefed in 2002 and was up to date for a few years beyond that. Since then to the present, there have been dozens of Mexican Mafia defectors who have shared very lengthy debriefs, giving up the names of every member who has been in existence to this day. You can probably double that number of debriefers in Nuestra Familia defectors who have given their detailed information. I am very familiar with the debriefs of Boxer Enriquez, Sailor Boy Gonzalez, Artie Guzman, Chuco Castro, Stranger Terzak, and many other Mexican Mafia members. Not one NF defector of significance, such as Death Row Joe, Art the Rock Beltran, Mosca Cerrato, Smiley from Salinas, Joe Cobos, aka Crow, none of these men ever mentioned the NF murder of a validated Mexican Mafia member. It would require a monumental task for all of us to conspire, many of us from different time frames, to not reveal the murder of an MM member by a rival prison gang. And why would any of us do that? Why would high-level NF members not drop a name? The answer is because there are none. Finally, I'm afraid that murdering an unarmed correctional officer does not qualify anyone as being proficient in hand-to-hand combat. I don't believe it has anything to do with anyone's capability, PNG. May all of you be blessed, be safe, and watch your back.